The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming. Inside a patch of canvas no thicker than a bedsheet. 3 children, huddled together, shivering so violently, their teeth clicked like dice. Their mother Eleanor held the center pole with bleeding hands, praying the storm wouldn't take the only thing they had left. They were miles from civilization, starving and terrified. Then through the roar of the thunder came a sound heavier than the rain hoofbeats. A shadow loomed over the tent, blocking out the lightning. A deep voice cut through the gale. "Ma'am, that canvas is a coffin waiting to happen. You'll sleep under a roof tonight." She didn't know it then, but that offer would cost her everything she was hiding and save everything she loved. The year was 1887, in the unforgiving expanse of the Montana Territory. The history books often talk about the gold rushes and the railroad barons, but they rarely mention the women who were left behind when the mines collapsed or the fever swept through the camps. Elena Cross was one of those women, and tonight she was fighting a war against God himself. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. It wasn't the polite, nourishing rain of the east. This was a high plains deluge, cold enough to freeze the marrow and heavy enough to turn the hard-packed earth into a sucking, treacherous mud. Elena was currently knee-deep in it, outside the pitiful structure she called home. It was a surplus army tent, purchased for $2 she shouldn't have spent, pitched near the overflow of Bitterroot Creek. Inside her 3 children, 7-year-old Toby, 5-year-old Rose, and the baby Leo, who was barely 18 months, were huddled on a pile of damp blankets. "Mama!" Rose cried out from inside, her voice thin and terrified. "The water is coming in under the rug." Elena gritted her teeth, shoving a heavy stone against the bottom flap of the canvas. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked from the cold, and the relentless work of scrubbing floors in town work she had lost 3 days ago, when the new proprietor of the saloon decided she looked too sad to serve drinks. "I know, baby, I know," Elena shouted over the roar of the wind, her hair plastered to her face. "Just stay on the crate. Don't step on the ground." She looked up at the sky, a swirling, bruised purple and black. She wasn't praying for salvation anymore. She was just bargaining for time. If they could survive the night, she could try to walk into town. Maybe beg the livery stable owner for a corner of a stall. But the town of Harlow was 5 miles away, and in this mud it might as well have been 50. A crack of thunder shook the ground, so loud it felt like the earth was splitting. The main support pole of the tent groaned. Elena lunged for it, throwing her slight weight against the wood, trying to be the anchor the tent didn't have. "Please," she whispered, tears finally mixing with the rain. "Not on them. Let it fall on me. But not on them." She was 24 years old, but in the flash of lightning, she looked 50. The stress of the last 6 months, since her husband William had vanished in the mines, had carved hollows into her cheeks. She had sold the furniture. She had sold her wedding ring. She had sold her hair. Now she was guarding a tent in a floodplain. It was then that she felt the vibration. It wasn't thunder. It was rhythmic, heavy. She wiped the water from her eyes and squinted into the dark. A shape detached itself from the gloom of the cottonwood trees. A horse. A massive black beast, snorting steam into the frigid air. And atop it, a figure wrapped in a dark oilskin slicker, looking less like a man and more like a mountain that had decided to move. The rider pulled the horse up short, the animal dancing nervously in the mud, just feet from where Eleanor was bracing the tent. Elena instinctively stepped between the horse and the tent flap, grabbing a piece of firewood she used as a club. "We have nothing!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Go away! We have nothing left to steal!" The rider didn't move immediately. He sat there, the rain cascading off the brim of his hat, obscuring his face. He seemed to be studying the pathetic scene, the sagging canvas, the mud washing over Elena's boots, the sound of the baby wailing inside. Then he swung his leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground. He was tall, landing with a heavy thud that ignored the mud. He walked toward her, ignoring the stick she brandished like a sword. "Stay back!" Elena warned, trembling. The man stopped. He reached up and tipped his hat back just an inch. A flash of lightning illuminated a face that was all sharp angles and rough stubble, with eyes the color of gunmetal. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was a low rumble, cutting under the wind. "Put the stick down. The creek's cresting. Another hour and this patch of dirt is going to be part of the river." "I have nowhere to go," Eleanor choked out, not lowering the weapon. "I didn't ask if you had a place," the man said. He stepped forward, grabbed the firewood from her hand with a gentle but firm grip, and tossed it aside. "I said the river is coming." He looked past her at the tent flap. "How many inside?" "3," Elena whispered, the fight draining out of her as the cold took over. The cowboy cursed softly under his breath. It wasn't a curse of anger at her, but at the situation. He turned back to his horse and unhooked a lantern, striking a match against his thigh to light it in a cupped hand, a miracle of dexterity in the storm. "My name is Elliot King," he said, holding the lantern up. "I run the Double Bar Ranch up the ridge. It's a 3-mile ride. You get the babies. I'll carry the boy." "I can't pay you," Elena blurted out. It was the only defense she had left her poverty. "I have no money, Mr. King. I can't pay for lodging." Elliot King looked at her, and for a second his hard expression softened. "Did I ask for a coin? I said get the babies. You'll sleep under a roof tonight. Now move before the water takes us all." The ride to the ranch was a blur of terror and exhaustion. Elliot had lifted Toby onto the front of his saddle, wrapping the boy in his own dry oilskin coat. Elena rode behind Elliot, clutching the baby, and rose, her face pressed against the cowboy's back to shield the infant from the wind. The horse, a beast Elliot called Judge, navigated the slick trails with an instinct that seemed supernatural. Every time the horse slipped, Elliot corrected him with a subtle shift of weight, a silent communication between man and beast that Eleanor was too frozen to appreciate. When they finally crested the ridge, the lights of the main house flickered like stars in a void. It wasn't a palace, but to Eleanor, the sprawling log structure looked like the grandest castle in Europe. Elliot didn't stop at the main house, though. He rode past it to a long, low building with smoke curling from a stone chimney. The bunkhouse. He dismounted and immediately reached up for the baby. "I've got at him," Elliot said. His large, gloved hands were surprisingly tender as he took Leo, tucking the bundle against his chest. He helped Elena down her legs, buckling as they hit the ground. He caught her by the elbow, steadying her. "Easy," he murmured. "Legs are numb. Blood needs to flow back." He kicked the door open. The warmth hit them like a physical blow. Inside a pot-bellied stove was roaring, casting an orange glow over 4 empty bunks. The room smelled of cedar tobacco and coffee. It was clean Spartan, but clean. "Sit," Elliot commanded, pointing to a bench near the stove. He set the baby down on a bunk and turned to Toby, who was shivering uncontrollably. Elliot stripped the wet oilskin off the boy. "You did good, son," Elliot said to the 7-year-old. "You rode tall." Toby looked up at the giant of a man, eyes wide. "Are you a sheriff?" "No," Elliot said, moving to a cupboard. He pulled out thick wool blankets. Just a rancher. For the next hour, the dynamic in the room was strange. Elliot King moved with efficiency, heating up a kettle of stew that had been sitting on the stove, finding dry flannel shirts that were miles too big for the children, but dry and warm. He hung a line near the fire for their soaked clothes. Elena sat with the baby, feeling the heat seep into her bones. But her mind was racing. Why men in this territory didn't do favors. Not without a cost. She watched him covertly. He was a handsome man in a rugged, dangerous way. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, and he moved with a slight limp that he tried to hide. "Eat," Elliot said, shoving a tin bowl of beef stew into her hands. Elena hesitated. "The children first." "They're eating." Elliot nodded. She looked over. Toby and Rose were already devouring the stew, sitting cross-legged on the bunk. Elliot had cut the meat into small pieces for them. Elena took a bite. The flavor salt, fat, savory beef was so intense she almost gagged. Her stomach cramped, unaccustomed to real food. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity. Elliot leaned against the doorframe, drinking a cup of black coffee, watching them. He wasn't leering. He was assessing. "You're the woman from the Gentry claim," he said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Elena froze the spoon halfway to her mouth. "My name is Elena Cross." "That's the name you're using," Elliot said flatly. "But your husband was William Gentry. He worked the Copperhead mine. Died 6 months back in a shaft collapse. Company evicted you 2 weeks later." Eleanor set the bowl down, her hands shaking again, but not from cold this time. "How do you know that—" "I make it my business to know who's starving on my fence line," Elliot said. He walked over to the stove and poured more coffee. "And I know that the mining company claims your husband stole a payroll ledger before he died." Elena stood up, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. "That's a lie. William was an honest man. They killed him with their negligence, and then they blackened his name to deny me his pension." "I believe you," Elliot said. The simplicity of the statement took the wind out of her sails. You do—" "I knew William," Elliot said, looking down into his cup. "He wasn't a thief. But the man who runs the Copperhead, Boyd Calloway, he's a different animal." Eleanor flinched at the name. Boyd Calloway. The man who had sneered at her when she begged for her husband's back pay. The man who had sent thugs to her previous shack to look for the ledger, tossing her furniture into the street. "If you know who I am," Elena whispered, "then you know Calloway has men looking for us. If we stay here, we bring trouble to your door." Elliot looked up, his grey eyes locking onto hers. A dark, dangerous smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Gentry, or Cross if you prefer, I've been waiting for trouble to knock on my door for a long time. It gets quiet out here." He set the cup down. "You and the kids are safe here. Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow we figure out how to get your life back." "Why?" Elena asked, tears welling up again. "Why would you do this?" Elliot paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He looked back at the sleeping children, then at her. "Because 5 years ago, I had a wife and a son. And one night, during a storm, just like this, a wheel broke on our wagon, 10 miles from town. No one stopped. No one came." He didn't finish the story. He didn't have to. The silence in the room screamed the ending. "Good night, Mom," Elliot said, and slipped out into the storm. The next morning broke with a deceptive calm. The rain had stopped, leaving the world scrubbed clean and smelling of pine and damp earth. Elena woke up with a start, panic gripping her chest for a moment, until she realized she was on a mattress, not the hard ground. The children were still asleep, tangled together like puppies. Elena moved quietly, finding her clothes dried by the fire. She dressed quickly and stepped outside. The double-bar ranch was breathtaking in the daylight. Rolling green hills stretched toward the jagged peaks of the Bitterroots. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark specks against the emerald grass. Near the corral, she saw Elliot. He was breaking a horse, a roan mare that was bucking and twisting. Elliot sat the saddle like he was glued to it, his face calm, almost bored. When the horse finally settled, huffing and stomping, Elliot patted its neck and slid off. He saw Elena and walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead with a bandana. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's in the cookhouse. Cook's name is Cookie. Don't laugh. He's sensitive about it." "Thank you, Mr. King," Elena said. She felt awkward in the daylight. "We can't impose any longer. The rain has stopped. I'll take the children and go where?" Elliot interrupted. "Back to the mud. The creek washed your tent 3 miles downstream. One of my hands found it this morning. Shredded." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Everything. The few clothes, the locket with her mother's picture, the last bag of cornmeal. Gone. She swayed. Elliot caught her arm. "Easy. Listen to me. I need a housekeeper. My last one quit because the isolation drove her crazy. You need a roof. I pay $12 a month plus room and board for you and the kids." It was a fortune. It was charity, she knew it, but it was charity wrapped in the dignity of work. "I work hard," Elena said, her voice firming up. "I don't take handouts. If I stay, I earn it. I scrub, I cook, I mend, and the children help with chores." "Deal," Elliot said. "But there's one condition." "What?" "You tell me everything about the day William died." Elena froze. The ranch hands were starting to drift toward the cookhouse, eyeing her with curiosity. She lowered her voice. "Why are you so interested in William?" Elliot looked toward the horizon, his jaw tightening. "Because William didn't just die in a collapse, Elena. He was blown up. I used to be a demolition expert for the railroad. I know the sound of dynamite versus a structural failure. I was riding by the mine that day. I heard it." Elena gasped, covering her mouth. "Blown up. And?" Elliot continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. 2 days before he died, William came to see me. Here. At the ranch." Elena stared at him. "He never told me that." "He wouldn't have. He was scared. He gave me something to hold on to. Said if anything happened to him, I was to wait until the dust settled, then find you." Elliot reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key. "He said this opens a lockbox in the First National Bank of Helena, but he made me swear not to give it to you until you were safe from Calloway." Elena stared at the key. It looked like a standard strongbox key, unremarkable in every way. "What's in the box?" He didn't say, but he said it was enough to hang Boyd Calloway and half the town council. Suddenly the sound of galloping horses interrupted them. 4 riders were coming up the long driveway, moving fast. Elliot's demeanor changed instantly. The relaxed rancher vanished. The gunman appeared. He unhooked the leather thong over the hammer of the Colt revolver on his hip. "Get inside," Elliot ordered, not looking at her. "Get the kids. Go to the main house, lock the door, and get under the windows." "Who is it?" Elena asked, terrified. "Company," Elliot said grimly. Elena ran. She gathered the confused children and sprinted for the heavy oak door of the main lodge. As she slammed the bolt home, she peeked through the lace curtains. The 4 riders reined in near the corral. The leader was a man in a pristine grey suit, wearing a bowler hat that looked ridiculous in the wild, yet he wore it with terrifying confidence. It was Boyd Calloway, and flanking him was Sheriff Miller, a man known more for his bribes than his badge and 2 hired guns. "Elliot!" Calloway shouted, his voice oily and loud. "I hear you picked up some stray dogs in the storm last night." Elliot stood his ground in the center of the yard, his hand hanging loose near his gun. "I picked up guests, Calloway. Learn the difference." "Guests?" Calloway laughed. "That woman is a thief. She's in possession of stolen company property. The sheriff here has a warrant." Sheriff Miller, a portly man with a red face, nodded nervously. "That's right, Elliot. Just hand over the girl and the brats. We don't want no trouble with the double bar." "There is no warrant," Elliot said calmly. "Because if there was, you would have served it 3 weeks ago. You're here because you're scared, Boyd. You're scared of what she knows." "She knows nothing," Calloway snapped. "She's a washerwoman." "Then why bring 3 guns to arrest a washerwoman?" Elliot countered. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "You're stepping into a mess, King. A mess that buried the last man who touched it." "Is that a confession?" Elliot asked. The tension stretched so tight it hummed. One of the hired guns, a man with a jagged scar on his cheek, twitched his hand toward his holster. Bang! The shot didn't come from the men. It came from Elliot. In a blur of motion too fast to track, he had drawn and fired. The bullet took the hat right off the hired gun's head, spinning it into the mud. The man hadn't even cleared leather. "Next one takes an ear." Elliot said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Get off my land." Calloway's horse reared. The mine owner turned purple with rage. "This isn't over, King. You think you can protect her? Winter is coming. Accidents happen." "Get," Elliot repeated. Calloway wheeled his horse around. "Let's go. We'll be back when he has to sleep." As the dust settled, Elena slid down the wall inside the house, clutching her chest. She realized then that the storm she had survived last night was nothing compared to the one that had just arrived. She wasn't just raising 3 kids in a tent anymore. She was in the middle of a war, and the only thing standing between her children and the grave was a cowboy with a dark past and a quick trigger finger. The decision was made over a map spread across the rough-hewn kitchen table later that night. The key William Gentry had left behind was burning a hole in Elliot's pocket. It was a beacon, but also a target. "We can't open the box here," Elliot said, tracing the route to Helena with a calloused finger. "There isn't a bank within 50 miles that Calloway doesn't own. We have to go to the capital, to the First National in Helena." Elena looked at the children who were sleeping soundly in the back room of the main house. "I can't leave them, but I can't take them into a war zone." "Cookie will watch them," Elliot assured her. "And I've got 2 men, Red and Dutch, who are loyal to the bone. They'll sit on the porch with shotguns until we get back. Calloway wants the ledger, not the kids. If we leave, he'll follow us." They left before dawn the next morning. The sky was a bruised purple, the air biting with the promise of early snow. They took a buckboard wagon lighter and faster than a coach with 2 fresh horses. Elliot drove a Winchester rifle resting across his knees. Eleanor sat beside him, dressed in a heavy wool coat Elliot had found in an old trunk. It had belonged to his late wife, a fact he didn't mention, but Eleanor sensed from the way his hand lingered on the fabric. The journey to Helena took 2 grueling days. They avoided the main roads cutting through the rocky foothills to lose any tales Calloway might have sent. The silence between them was heavy, at first filled only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the wind in the pines. But as the miles rolled by, The walls began to come down. "You said you had a family," Elena said softly on the second afternoon. They were stopped by a stream to water the horses. Elliot stiffened, adjusting the harness on the lead mare. "A long time ago. Sarah, and a boy, Timothy. They died of fever during the '82 blizzard. Doctor couldn't get through the drifts." Elena walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. The muscle beneath the sleeve was hard as iron. "That's why you stopped for us. You saw them in the rain." Elliot looked down at her, his grey eyes unguarded for the first time. "I saw a woman fighting for her life. Most folks out here just give up when the wind blows hard enough. You didn't." The moment hung in the air, charged and fragile. Elliot reached out his thumb, brushing a stray curl of hair from her cheek. His skin was rough, but his touch was incredibly gentle. Elena leaned into it, her breath hitching. It had been so long since she had been touched with anything other than aggression or dismissal. "We should keep moving," Elliot murmured, though he didn't pull his hand away immediately. "Helena is still a ride away." They arrived in Helena as the gas lamps were flickering to life. The city was a bustling contrast to the isolation of the ranch, noisy, dirty, and alive with the frenetic energy of a gold town. They waited until morning to visit the bank. The First National was a fortress of stone and iron. Elliot escorted Elena inside his eyes, scanning every face in the lobby. They were ushered into a private room after presenting the key to a skeptical bank manager. When the lockbox was placed on the table, Elena's hands shook. She looked at Elliot for strength. He nodded. She turned the key. The mechanism clicked loud in the silent room. Inside there was no gold. There was a leather-bound journal and a rolled-up document. Elena unfurled the document first. "It's a land deed," she whispered, scanning the legal text. "For the section of the valley known as Devil's Pocket." Elliot frowned. Devil's Pocket is where the Copperhead mine dumps its tailings. It's worthless rock. "Read the journal," Elena said, opening the book. Her eyes widened as she read William's neat handwriting. "October 12th. I have found it. The main vein doesn't run north under the company land. It dips south, deep into Devil's Pocket. Calloway knows. He's been trying to buy the land quietly, but he doesn't know I bought the deed 3 months ago, under a shell name to protect it." Elliot slammed his hand on the table. "That's it! Calloway isn't just stealing payroll. He's mining a vein he doesn't own. If this gets out, the territory will strip his charter, and he'll go to prison for fraud and theft. This deed makes you the owner of the richest gold vein in Montana." "He killed William for this," Elena said, her voice trembling with rage. "He killed the father of my children for a piece of paper, and he'll kill us to get it back," Elliot said grimly. He grabbed the documents and stuffed them into his coat. "We need to find a federal judge. Local law is bought, but a federal judge can't be ignored." As they exited the private room, the atmosphere in the bank had changed. The teller who had let them in was gone. In his place stood a man leaning against the counter, cleaning his fingernails with a Bowie knife. It was the hired gun from the ranch, the one Elliot had humiliated. "Mr. Calloway sends his regards." The gunman grinned. Elliot didn't hesitate. He grabbed Eleanor, shoved her behind a heavy oak pillar, and flipped the heavy teller's table over, just as the front window shattered. Glass rained down like diamonds. Gunfire erupted from the street, chewing up the mahogany interior of the bank. "Back door!" Elliot roared, firing 2 shots from his Colt toward the entrance to keep the gunmen's heads down. They scrambled through the bank's rear exit into a narrow alleyway. Bullets chipped the brickwork around them. Elliot half-carried Elena, boosting her into the bed of a delivery wagon passing by. He vaulted up after her, snapping the reins from the surprised driver's hands and whipping the horses into a frenzy. They tore through the streets of Helena, a chaotic chase that ended only when they lost their pursuers in the labyrinth of the rail yards. They abandoned the wagon and stole 2 saddle horses riding hard for the open country. "They know we have the proof," Elliot shouted over the wind as they galloped south. "They'll be heading for the ranch. They'll use the kids as leverage." The ride back was a nightmare of endurance. They didn't stop for sleep. They switched horses at a way station where Elliot knew the owner riding the animals into the ground. When they crested the ridge overlooking the Double Bar Ranch, smoke was already curling into the sky. "No," Elena screamed. They raced down the hill. The main house was intact, but the barn was burning. Gunfire crackled in the air. Elliot leaped from his horse before it fully stopped, his rifle in hand. "Get to the house. Stay low." He didn't wait for her. He ran toward the bunkhouse where flashes of muzzle fire showed his men were pinned down. Elena didn't listen to his order to hide. She ran toward the main house, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Toby Rose!" she screamed. The front door of the main house swung open, but it wasn't the children. It was a man she didn't know, a rough-looking drifter with a bandana over his face. He lunged for her. Elena didn't think. The rage of a mother protecting her young took over. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the porch rack and swung it with all her might. It connected with the man's knee with a sickening crunch. He went down, howling. Elena scrambled over him, rushing inside. The children were huddled under the dining table with Cookie standing over them, a double-barreled shotgun aimed at the door. "Mrs. Gentry!" Cookie yelled, his face soot-stained. "They tried to flank us. Where is Elliot? He's at the corral. They've got him pinned." Elena looked out the window. Down by the burning barn, Elliot was behind a water trough, exchanging fire with at least 6 men. He was outgunned and outflanked. Calloway was there shouting orders from the safety of a carriage parked safely out of range. Elena saw a rifle lying on the floor, dropped by the intruder she had disabled. She picked it up. It was heavy, cold steel. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she had watched Elliot. She knew how to load the lever action. She stepped onto the porch. She raised the rifle, aiming not at the men, but at the carriage, at the arrogant figure in the grey suit. She pulled the trigger. The recoil bruised her shoulder instantly. The bullet missed Calloway, but it shattered the carriage lantern right beside his head, showering him with glass and oil. Calloway shrieked and dove to the ground. The distraction was enough. Elliot popped up, firing with terrifying precision. 1, 2, 3 shots. 3 men dropped. The others scrambled for the cover. "Retreat!" Calloway screamed, scrambling into the driver's seat of his carriage. "Pull back!" The attackers fled, riding off into the dusk. But as the dust settled, Elliot didn't stand up. He slumped against the trough. Elena dropped the rifle and ran to him. "Elliot!" She slid into the mud beside him. He was clutching his side blood, seeping dark and fast between his fingers. "I'm all right." He grunted, his face pale. "Just a scratch." It wasn't a scratch. The bullet had caught him in the flank. "Get him inside," Elena shouted to Cookie and the other hands who were emerging from the smoke. "Now!" The night that followed was a blur of blood and hot water. Elena dug the bullet out herself, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Elliot passed out from the pain twice, but he survived the night. By morning, the fever had set in. He was delirious, muttering names from his past. "Sarah, get the boy. The water is rising." Elena sat by his bedside, cooling his forehead with a damp rag. She realized then that she loved him. Not just out of gratitude, but because he was the only man who had ever looked at her and seen a partner, not a possession. But love wouldn't stop Calloway. Cookie entered the room looking grim. "Ma'am, we got a problem. Calloway has cut the telegraph lines, and he's got men watching the pass. We're besieged." "He's waiting for us to starve," Elena said, her voice hard. "Or for Elliot to die." "He sent a messenger," Cookie said hesitantly. "He wants to parley. Says if you bring the deed to the mine entrance at noon, he'll let the rest of us go. He promises no one gets hurt." Elena looked at Elliot's pale face. Then she looked at the corner of the room where her children were playing quietly, too scared to make noise. "He's lying," Elena said. "He'll kill us all the moment he has that paper. It's the only evidence of his crimes." "What do we do?" Cookie asked. "We're out of ammo mostly. We can't hold off another attack." Elena stood up. She walked to the window and looked toward the distant peaks where the Copperhead mine lay. "He wants the deed, I'll give it to him." She went to the desk and grabbed the deed. Then she took a bottle of kerosene from the lamp shelf and a box of matches. "Cookie," she said, "load Elliot into the back of the buckboard. Hide him under the hay. Put the children in with him. Tell them it's a game, they have to be quiet as mice." "What are you doing?" "I'm going to the mine," Elena said. "I'm going to draw Calloway out. While I have him distracted, you take the wagon down the old goat trail on the east ridge. It's steep, but it's the only way out. He won't be watching. Get them to the marshal in Deer Lodge." "He'll kill you, Elena," Cookie said, using her first name for the first time. "He might," she said, checking the load in Elliot's heavy revolver and tucking it into her apron pocket. "But he won't get the land." She rode out alone an hour later. She rode Judge Elliot's massive black horse. The animal seemed to sense the gravity of the mission, moving with a steady, silent gait. The Copperhead mine was a scar on the mountain, a gaping maw of timber and stone. Calloway was waiting there, surrounded by 10 armed men. Elena rode into the clearing, holding the rolled-up parchment high in the air. "I'm here," she shouted. "Let them go." Calloway stepped forward, a smug smile on his face. "Mrs. Gentry, I knew you were a sensible woman. Hand it over." "Not until I see my family riding away safe," she lied. "You're in no position to bargain," Calloway sneered. "Boys, grab her." 2 men moved toward her. Elena didn't flinch. She uncorked the small bottle of kerosene she had hidden in her palm and poured it over the parchment. "Stop!" Calloway screamed. Elena struck a match on her saddle horn. The flame flared, bright and dangerous. She held it inches from the oil-soaked deed. "1 step closer, and this deed burns," she declared. "And if it burns, you lose the claim forever. The government will seize the land as unclaimed territory." Calloway froze. "You wouldn't. You need that money." "I need my children, Elif," Elena said. "Call your men off, now." It was a standoff. The wind whistled through the canyon. The match burned down toward Elena's fingers. Suddenly, a shot rang out. But it didn't hit Elena. The gun was shot out of the hand of the man nearest to her. Calloway spun around. "Who's there?" From the ridge above the mine, a voice thundered down, a voice that sounded weak but filled with cold fury. "I told you, Calloway, get off my land!" Elliot. The climb up the goat trail was a torture Elliot King wouldn't have wished on his worst enemy. Every step was a negotiation with pain. The bullet wound in his flank felt like a hot poker twisted deep inside him, radiating a sickening heat that made his vision swim. He leaned heavily on Cookie, his breathing ragged and shallow sweat cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Easy, boss." Cookie whispered, his own breath coming in wheezes as they crested the ridge. "We're here. Don't die on me now. Elliot gritted his teeth, forcing his eyes to focus on the scene unfolding in the canyon below. From this height, the Copperhead Mine looked like an open wound in the earth, a scar of grey shale and rotting timber against the majesty of the mountain. And in the center of that scar, surrounded by 10 armed men, was Eleanor. She looked terrifyingly small on the back of his massive horse Judge. But her posture was rigid, her chin held high. She held the rolled parchment of the deed like a torch in the darkness. She's really doing it, Elliot murmured, a mixture of terror and awe gripping his chest. She's calling his bluff. Down in the canyon, the wind whipped Elena's hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hand, the hand clutching the bottle of kerosene, was steady. She could smell the acrid scent of the oil, a sharp contrast to the pine-scented air. Boyd Calloway stood 10 paces away, his face twisted in a mask of arrogant amusement. He didn't see a threat. He saw a desperate widow playing a game she didn't understand. "I'm here." Elena's voice cracked, then strengthened, echoing off the canyon walls. "Let them go." Calloway stepped forward, dusting off the lapel of his grey suit. He looked at her with the pity one might show a wounded animal before putting it down. "Mrs. Gentry, I knew you were a sensible woman. You've dragged this out long enough. Hand it over and you can ride away. You have my word." "Your word is worth less than the dirt under my horse's hooves," Eleanor retorted, her eyes darting to the men flanking him. Their hands hovered near their holsters. She knew with chilling certainty that she wasn't leaving this canyon alive, not unless she changed the rules. "You're in no position to bargain." Calloway sneered, his patience evaporating. "Boys, grab her. Take the paper." 2 of the hired guns stepped forward, their boots crunching loudly on the loose gravel. Eleanor didn't flinch. With a fluid motion, she uncorked the small bottle of kerosene she had hidden in her palm. She poured the liquid over the parchment, the oil dark and heavy, soaking into the fibers of the deed instantly. "Stop!" Calloway screamed, his eyes widening in genuine horror. Elena struck a match on her saddle horn. The sulfur hissed and a bright orange flame flared into life, dancing dangerously close to the oil-soaked document. "One step closer and this deed burns," she declared. Her voice was cold, stripped of all fear. "And if it burns, you lose the claim forever. The government will seize the land as unclaimed territory. You'll be left with nothing but a hole in the ground and a prison sentence." Calloway froze. He raised a hand, signaling his men to halt. Greed warred with violence in his eyes. "You wouldn't," he hissed. "You're destitute. That paper is a fortune. It's your children's future." "I need my children alive more than I need them rich," Elena said, locking eyes with him. "Call your men off. Now!" It was a standoff, carved in silence. The only sound was the wind whistling through the timber and the heavy breathing of the men. The flame in Elena's hand burned lower, nearing her fingers. She could feel the heat. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the stillness. It didn't come from Calloway's men. The bullet struck the revolver of the hired gun nearest to Elena, sending the weapon spinning into the dirt with a metallic clang. The man yelped, clutching his numbed hand. Calloway spun around, scanning the cliffs, panic rising in his voice. "Who's there?" From the high ridge above the mine, a voice thundered down. It was strained weak, but filled with a cold, terrifying fury that froze the blood in Calloway's veins. "I told you, Calloway. Get off my land." "Elliot, you're a dead man, King." Calloway screamed, his composure shattering completely. He waved his arms frantically at the cliffs. Kill them all! The canyon erupted into chaos. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't drop the burning match on the deed. Instead, she threw it hard to her right, straight onto a pile of dry, blasting powder crates and oil-soaked rags stacked near the mine entrance. She kicked Judge's flanks hard. Go! The massive horse responded instantly, spinning on his haunches and galloping toward the cover of the dense tree line. Boom! The explosion was deafening, a physical blow that shook the ground. A fireball rolled outward, consuming the mine entrance and collapsing the timber supports in a cloud of splintered wood and choking dust. The shockwave knocked Calloway's men off their feet, scattering the horses. On the ridge, Elliot struggled to keep his rifle steady. His vision was blurring at the edges. Cover fire, Cookie. Cookie unleashed a barrage from his Winchester, the shots echoing like thunder. The element of surprise combined with the terrifying explosion broke the morale of the hired guns. They were mercenaries, not soldiers. They weren't being paid enough to die in a rock slide against a ghost. Retreat! One of them yelled, scrambling for his mount. Let's get out of here! Cowards! Calloway shrieked, stumbling through the smoke, his face blackened with soot. He stood alone near the edge of the mine shaft, his empire crumbling around him. Madness took over his eyes. He spotted Elena's silhouette as she reached the edge of the trees. She had stopped turning back to check on the ridge. Calloway raised his pistol. His hand was shaking, but the distance wasn't great. If I can't have it, he screamed, no one can. Elliot saw the gun rise. He saw the barrel level at Elena. He tried to lift his rifle, but his arms were like lead. The weapon felt impossibly heavy. He couldn't steady it. He dropped the rifle, the metal clattering on the rock. Elliot! Cookie yelled. Elliot drew the heavy Colt revolver from his hip. His hand was trembling. The distance was over 50 yards, a near impossible shot with a handgun, especially for a man bleeding out. He breathed out, closing his eyes for a split second. In the dark behind his eyelids, he saw Sarah. He saw his son. And then he saw Eleanor standing in the mud, holding up a tent against the storm. You'll sleep under a roof tonight. He opened his eyes. The world slowed down. The sound of the wind faded. There was only the front sight of the pistol and the grey suit in the distance. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil jarred his wounded side, sending a fresh spike of agony through him. Down in the canyon, the bullet found its mark. It didn't kill Boyd Calloway. It struck him in the right shoulder, shattering the bone. The impact spun him around violently. Calloway shrieked, dropping his gun. The force of the spin threw him off balance. His boots slipped on the loose, shifting shale at the very lip of the mine shaft, the same shaft where he had buried William Gentry's truth. Calloway flailed his fingers, clawing at the air, grasping for purchase that wasn't there. He looked up, his eyes meeting Elena's across the clearing. For a second the arrogance was gone, replaced by a bottomless terror. Then the ground gave way. With a long, drawn-out scream that echoed down into the dark bowels of the earth, Boyd Calloway fell. The darkness swallowed him whole. Silence returned to the mountain. The dust settled slowly, coating the rocks in a ghostly grey. Elena stared at the empty space where the monster had stood. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a heavy, exhausting relief. She turned Judge toward the ridge and spurred him up the slope. When she reached the top, she slid off the horse before it had fully stopped, her legs nearly giving out. Elliot was sitting on the ground, his back against a boulder. His face was pale as a sheet, his shirt soaked with fresh blood, but his grey eyes were open. He was smiling. "You didn't leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Elena fell to her knees beside him, tears finally streaming down her face, cutting through the soot and grime. She pressed her hands over his, staunching the flow of blood. "I told you." She choked out a sob, breaking free from her chest. "We work for our keep. I wasn't going to let you do the heavy lifting alone." Elliot laughed, a wheezing, wet sound that turned into a cough. He reached up his rough thumb, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Remind me," he breathed, "to give you a raise." 6 months later. The spring of 1888 arrived with a gentleness that the Montana Territory rarely saw. The snowmelt turned the creeks into rushing ribbons of silver, and the valley floor exploded in a carpet of wildflowers, bluebells, Indian paintbrush, and shooting stars. The Double Bar Ranch had transformed. The burnt barn had been rebuilt, bigger and sturdier than before, the smell of fresh pine timber still lingering in the air. New fencing stretched toward the horizon, paid for by the legal settlement from the Copperhead Mining Company. The federal investigation, spurred by the documents in William's lockbox, had been swift and merciless. It had cleared William Gentry's name, exposing Calloway's fraud, and awarding his widow full rights to the Devil's Pocket vein. But Elena didn't mind it. She had seen enough darkness in the earth. Instead, she leased the rights to an honest consortium from the east, ensuring a steady royalty check that meant her children would never know hunger again. On a warm Sunday afternoon, the front porch of the main ranch house was alive with the sounds of a life fully lived. Toby, now 8 and taller, was near the corral trying to rope a fence post with serious concentration. Cookie sat on the rail nearby, whittling a stick and offering loud, terrible advice. "It's all in the wrist, boy. You're throwing it like a sack of potatoes." Rose was in the tall grass, chasing a new litter of barn kittens, her laughter ringing like a bell. And little Leo, sturdy on his legs now, was waddling after a butterfly, tumbling over his own feet and giggling. Elena stepped out onto the porch, the screen door creaking familiarly behind her. She carried 2 glasses of cold lemonade. She wore a dress of blue calico that matched her eyes, her hair pinned up with a silver comb, the first luxury she had bought for herself. Elliot was sitting in the rocking chair, his left leg propped up on a stool. The limp from the bullet wound was permanent now, a stiff hitch in his gait that required a cane on bad days, but he got around fine. He was watching the children, a look of profound peace on his face that softened the sharp angles of his profile. He took the glass from her, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch still sent a warm current through her, a reminder that they were alive, that they were here. "Marshal Graves stopped by this morning," Elliot said, taking a sip and looking out at the purple peaks of the bitter roots. "Said the town council is putting together a ballot. They want me to run for sheriff in the fall." Elena smiled, sitting on the railing facing him. "And what did you say to that?" Elliot shook his head slowly. "I told him I'm busy. I've got a ranch to run, cows to move, and a family to look after." He set the glass down and looked at her. The shadows that had haunted him for 5 years, the ghosts of the blizzard, the empty rooms were gone. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble she had come to love. He stood up slowly, testing his weight on his bad leg. He stepped closer to her, taking her hand in his large, calloused one. "I've been thinking." "Oh no," she teased gently. "That's usually dangerous." "Serious thinking." He corrected, a small smile playing on his lips. "That bunkhouse. It's getting too small for 3 growing kids. Toby needs his own space, and Rose has too many kittens." "It is tight." She agreed, her heart beginning to beat faster. "I was thinking of asking you about adding a room to the back." "I was thinking," Elliot interrupted softly, "that maybe they don't need the bunkhouse at all. Maybe there's plenty of room in the main house. The upstairs bedrooms are empty. They're just gathering dust." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. "And I was thinking that I don't want to be your employer anymore. I want to be something else. If you'd be willing to share this house with me. Permanently." Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the man who had ridden into the storm when no one else would. The man who had taken a bullet for her children. The man who had helped her find her own strength. She looked out at the yard where Toby had finally roped the post and was cheering where her children were safe fed and happy. "Cowboy," she whispered, leaning in her forehead, resting against his. "I thought you'd never ask." He kissed her then, deep and slow, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in blazing shades of gold and violet. The wind blew through the valley, rustling the cottonwoods. But this time the wind didn't scream. It sang, and for the first time, in a long time, everyone at the Double Bar Ranch was sleeping under a roof that nothing, not wind, not rain, and not men like Boyd Calloway, could ever tear down. And that is the incredible, heart-pounding conclusion to the story of Elena Cross and Elliot King. From a flooded tent in the middle of a storm, to the owners of the richest gold vein in Montana, they fought for their lives and found love in the wildest place on earth. Did you expect that twist with the mine shaft? It seems the mountain finally passed its own judgment on Calloway. If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells us you want more Western romances. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We post amazing, true-to-life tales every Tuesday and Friday. Share this video with someone who needs a happy ending today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.